What is going on, guys? It is Wrestlelamia here, back with some more news. Join us now as we look at the wildest news stories and rumors you need to know, including WWE Getting Desperate, a spoiler on Goldberg's future, Lita 180's on Saudi Arabia, AEW Wrestler Struggles, WWE really want an AEW champ, a former superstar is squashed on Impact Wrestling, and much more. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos, and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Now let's do the intro and get straight into our first story. Our first story looks at WWE Getting Desperate. Topping today's news is a report that Vince McMahon's efforts to ensure its upcoming Road to WrestleMania Madison Square Garden show is a success after the dismal attendance at last December's holiday show. Meltzer is reporting in this week's Observer that it's pretty clear Vince McMahon wasn't taking that last Madison Square Garden show doing one of the lowest crowds in the last 80 years in the building lying down. Now, you may recall that WWE's holiday super show was anything but super in terms of attendance. At the time, the WWE had to replace several matches as wrestlers were absent due to COVID protocols. However, ticket sales were reportedly poor even before this occurred. Now the WWE is loading up the show with two names fans rarely see at house shows: Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey. Whenever Vince puts his top stars on house shows, you know he's desperate. Meltzer commented, not only did he add Lesnar to the show, and every Lesnar appearance is very expensive and hardly cost effective for a house show, particularly in a building where you need a huge number just to break even, and really running the building itself with the crowd they drew the last time would be tough. They also added Rousey to the show. The WWE faces a serious problem with the New York market, a market it dominated for decades, with MSG living up to its name of the Mecca of professional wrestling. However, as the WWE moved to larger arenas, it booked MSG less and less, yet still expected Garden officials to exclude any wrestling but the WWE. The WWE's neglect of MSG likely didn't endear McMahon to MSG executives or fans were used to regular shows at the Garden. Meltzer described just how loaded the upcoming Garden show will be. MSG has a loaded pay-per-view caliber lineup with Lashley vs Lesnar for the WWE title, Reigns vs Rollins for the Universal title, Lynch vs Belair vs Ripley for the Raw Women's title, and Rousey and Banks vs Flair and Natalya. Not only do you have a house show with Lesnar and Rousey, plus Reigns defending, which he never does on house shows, his matches are virtually always trios matches. The ticket sales appear weak so far, with Meltzer reporting even with the big lineup at the press time, they were only at 3,979, but no doubt they'll start discounting tickets soon. It'll be interesting to see just how the WWE responds if the MSG show underperforms, with two wrestlers appearing who rarely compete at house shows. Another point of interest will be whether the Garden allows AEW to hold shows in the former WWE stronghold. If so, it'd be seen as another sign of the WWE's national dominance weakening. Next up, a spoiler on Goldberg vs Reigns at Elimination Chamber. Potential spoilers for Roman Reigns' Universal Championship defense against Bill Goldberg at the upcoming Elimination Chamber event in Saudi Arabia, as cultaholics Aiden Gibbons is speculating on what might happen based on Goldberg's upcoming WWE schedule. Goldberg is currently advertised to appear at WWE SmackDown tapings from the Smoothie King Center in New Orleans, Louisiana on February 11th, with the WWE set to tape a live edition of the Blue Brand and the Go Home SmackDown for Elimination Chamber on the same night. The WWE Hall of Famer isn't advertised for any episodes of SmackDown after Elimination Chamber though, which suggests he won't be Universal Champion on the road to WrestleMania. However, fans shouldn't rule out the WWE pulling a swerve by keeping Goldberg's appearance a secret. Goldberg is believed to have one match left on his contract, which will be fulfilled at Elimination Chamber, but as previously reported, there has been talk of signing Dollar Bill to a new deal given his nostalgia value for the WWE Saudi Arabia shows. Next up, Lita 180's on Saudi Arabia. Speaking of the WWE's upcoming Elimination Chamber event, WWE Hall of Famer Lita recently explained the reason for changing her opposition to competing in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, a country which has included limiting women's rights. Lita recently chatted with the Ring the Bella show about why she's willing to work in Saudi Arabia. I was outspoken on the early relationship on WWE and Saudi. Oh, they say they want women to wrestle over there. There's no women on the card. There are now women on the card. Lita added that she feels the female wrestlers have an impact on Saudi society when they compete there. And I've talked to the women personally that have been over there, and they're like, it's unbelievable. There are women crying, never thinking that they would get to see two women be so strong in the ring. they're like, it's really powerful. And so sure, they do have a long way to go. Do we as a society have a long way to go? Absolutely, but you gotta take the opportunities when they're there. Now, while cynics might say Lita's motivations are all about the money, there's no denying that more women's matches have taken place in Saudi Arabia, and they seem to be increasing as the upcoming show features a women's elimination chamber match, as well as Lita challenging Becky Lynch for the Raw Women's Championship. Next up, a wrestler struggles in AEW. Now, speaking of women's wrestling, AEW star Hikaru Shida recently spoke with the status of the women's wrestling in AEW, noting that it's become difficult for Japanese women to succeed in All Elite Wrestling. The former AEW Women's World Champion discussed the situation in a column for Japan's weekly pro wrestling publication. She pointed out the two factors for the Japanese wrestlers' difficulties finding success in AEW. My feeling is that the hurdle for Japanese women's pro wrestling to come to AEW has become much higher. The major cause is the Corona disaster, which is not easy to finish, and it's because the AEW women's division has grown so much in the past year. Shida discussed how AEW relied on several Japanese stars during its early days. At the time of the launch, the women's division of AEW relied heavily on Japanese female pro wrestlers, and that was just one of the selling points of the division. But that was only for a while after the launch. Nowadays, being a Japanese female pro wrestler is not much of an advantage as it used to be. Ironically, Shida seems to feel that the growth of AEW's women's division, which until recently was seen as a liability rather than an asset, has increased competition for female stars. AEW is an organization that is constantly changing and the players come and go very rapidly. TV and YouTube. If you've been following AEW on Fight TV or YouTube, you'll know that the women's division in particular has seen an increase in the number of young, cute and dynamic players over the past year. Shida continued that being Japanese is now a liability for wrestlers due to several factors. On the contrary, it's become more of a handicap in terms of language barrier, obtaining a work visa and the Corona disaster. I myself am no exception to this, and even as a member of the AEW since its inception and a former women's champion, I am struggling to survive in the current AEW. Now, AEW has grown over the last 3 years, so it's no surprise that wrestlers are competing for spots more than ever. However, Shida said the language barrier for some Japanese wrestlers is becoming more of an issue. What do you think of our struggles? Let us know in the comments down below. Next up, WWE really want an AEW champ. The WWE is always on the lookout for new talent, and it appears the promotion would love to sign current TBS champion Jade Cargill. The Madman Wrestling podcast Andrew Zarian recently reported, "I know for a fact that people in WWE are interested in her now that they've gotten to see what she can do on television." Cargill, who's been reportedly being mentored by Bryan Danielson, recently spoke with Chris Jericho about her past opportunity to sign with the WWE. Cargill said she felt more comfortable signing with Tony Khan and noted several concerns, including WWE's insistence that she dropped several online deals she had. Would you guys like to see Cargill in WWE? Let us know in the comments down below. Next up, WWE announces big names for WrestleMania Backlash. Well, yep, they are still going with the WrestleMania Backlash name. We thought they were going to drop that goofiness. But even though the show isn't taking place until May, WWE is hyping a number of big names for the event. Ringside News is reporting that Becky Lynch, Ronda Rousey, Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns, Sasha Banks and Charlotte Flair are the featured wrestlers in the show's graphic. If nothing else, this should give fans an idea of who the WWE plans to utilize as its major players after Mania. Next up, WWE preparing WrestleMania replacement for Seth Rollins. And now that Shane McMahon is apparently out of WrestleMania, who does the WWE have planned to take over Shane O'Mac's spot at the Showcase of the Immortals? Ringside News reports that the WWE already has a replacement for Shane, who was rumored to face Seth Rollins, but the news site did not mention any names. However, Wrestling News' Paul Davis observed, WWE has subtly been teasing a split between Rollins and Kevin Owens, so that could be a potential match for Mania. Owens' current storyline is that he may miss WrestleMania because he does not have a spot in the Elimination Chamber match, and Rollins got his spot without having to qualify. Now, we always enjoy seeing Rollins and KO in the ring, but the two just feuded 2 years ago, so the WWE should consider an alternative for both men who made a successful team as of late on Raw. And finally, a former WWE superstar was squashed on Impact Wrestling. And last but not least, fans who tuned into this week's edition of Impact got to see Josh Alexander squash former WWE superstar Connor, who now works as Big Con. The former member of the Ascension made a not so auspicious debut on Impact, quickly tapping out to Alexander after just 1 minute. Well, there you have it, folks, the wildest news stories and rumors you need to know. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.